So we are here talking about the European Union. As I have already said, the one close to the economic union is the European Union, and um, there is a difference between Europe, European Union, and countries that use euro as their own currency. So actually those countries in EU or in European Union that use euro as their own currency are called the Eurozone, right? Eurozone, those who use euro as their own currency. So the European Union, initially it began in 1958 with the Treaty of Rome. And the objective is to harmonize national laws and regulations so that goods, services, people, and money could flow freely across national borders. Okay, so in 1991, the Maastricht Treaty set the stage for transition to an economic union with a central bank and single currency. So you know that they use single currency and they have a central bank. So as we have said, this central bank is the one that sets the monetary policy, and together with other members. So European Union uses this similar monetary policy. Okay. So in European Union, there are about 28 countries, and because of the Brexit, you know, because of the UK, it's going to be 27, right? And a total of 450 million people are there. And GNI, the gross national income, is about 15 trillion. So I guess we talked about GNI and GDP. So GNI is one of the measures, measurement that we use for the economy of a country. Okay, so we either use gross national income or gross domestic product, or gross national income per capita. Okay, and the euro currency was established in 1999, and the harmonization of laws and regulations are set. There was price transparency, no customs at national borders. So if you go to any of the 28 member countries of the EU, so there is no customs that you have to pay at national borders, because they have eliminated those customs, right? So these are the member countries and their population size and GDP in 2006. That is the pre-Brexit data. Okay. So as I've already mentioned, what economic union, which is at the top of the hierarchy of preferential free trade agreement, says that the final or the goal of economic union finally will be to have the same government. Okay, but in European Union, you know, these 28 countries, they have their own government set. So even though they are not at the last stage of economic union, we can say European Union is a very good example of economic union in the hierarchy of preferential free trade agreements. Okay, and the other is the Middle East. So in Middle East, we have these countries. We have Afghanistan, Bahrain, Cyprus, we have Egypt, Iran. All these countries are in the Middle East, and they are primarily Arab, because 95% of this 95% of the people in these countries are of Muslim religion, and 5% of them are Christians, okay, and Jewish. So there are wide variations in economic freedom ranking. So for example, Bahrain was ranked the 18th, UAE 25th, Saudi Arabia 77th. Okay, so economic freedom ranking. Last week we have seen this free, partly free, and restricted, something like that. So economic freedom is categorized into these four categories, and from this you can see Saudi Arabia is 77th in ranking in economic freedom. So oil prices drive the commerce among these countries, and 25% of world's oil, as you know, comes from Saudi Arabia. So mainly these Middle East countries, they sell oil and petroleum to other parts of the world. And as you know, Arab Spring has started in 2011. That has hugely impacted the economy of most of these countries. For example, you can mention Yemen, which is still in big problem. You can mention Syria. You can mention Iraq. You can mention Iran. Okay, and Jordan. Most of these countries were affected by the Arab Spring in 2011. And there is a Gulf Cooperation Council, key regional organization, which is signed among these Middle East countries. So this Gulf Cooperation Council is established in 1981 by 6 countries with 45% of the world's oil, only 80% of the output from what they have. And these countries are attempting to diversify their industries too. So if, for example, if you take UAE, is diversifying to other economic sectors also, right? But they are mostly influential with petroleum and oil and their prices in the world, right? And maybe probably the last one is Africa. In Africa, we have about 54 nations over 3 distinct areas: the Republic of South Africa, the North Africa, and the Black Africa and Sub-Saharan Africa. Okay. So Arabs in the north differ politically and economically from the rest of the continent, because some of them, even for example, if you take, so the north is Egypt, Morocco, Algeria, Mauritius. So these are found in North Africa. And for example, if you take Morocco is not even a member of African Union. Okay, so it has joined the African Union recently, before like 2 or 3 years, because they were in Arab League nations. Okay, so they differ politically and economically from the rest of the continent. They are also the strongest in economy. Okay, if you take Egypt, Morocco, Libya, so those on North Africa are economically better as compared to, for example, the Sub-Saharan Africa and the Black Africa, right? So there is MENA, that is a Middle East and North African agreement, which is viewed as a regional entity, and there are regional agreements among these countries. So even recently, the West African countries have signed a free trade agreement. So as I've said, this free trade agreement is not recognized by the WTO, because as most of the other preferential free trade agreements, but they're still created. And these regional agreements are for Economic Community of West African States, East African Cooperation, and South African Development Community. So there are also free trade agreements signed among countries in Africa, among these 54 nations. But again, as I've mentioned, the problem is, again, most of this, out of the 30 countries, mostly African countries are there, which are not members of the WTO. And being not member of the WTO, they are not abide by the rules of free trade agreement. signed by the members of the WTO. But the regional agreements which are signed among these nations in Africa still works with avoiding or with abolishing tariffs among the countries. Okay, so this is the last. I would like to go back and show some of the focus areas here. Okay, so I want you to differentiate between bilateral trade agreements, free trade agreements, and regional trade agreements. Okay, so one important point I would like to remind you is to differentiate the bilateral, what is bilateral, and today we are having problem with the WACO. So I want you to differentiate between bilateral and multilateral trade agreement. Okay, bilateral is between two countries, multilateral is between three or more countries. So when they sign agreement, we say it is a multilateral. And basically, WTO is concerned about the multilateral trade agreements. And WTO's mission is to promote a free trade among nations. That is what WTO is concerned about. Okay, and there are different agreements. There is, as I said, a free trade agreement. Then there are regional trade agreements. Okay, so a regional trade agreement could be a free trade agreement, but not all free trade agreements are regional trade agreements. Okay. Is that clear? Regional trade agreements could be free trade agreements, but not all free trade agreements are regional trade agreements. Okay, because if you take, for example, a North American free trade agreement, it could be called a regional trade agreement because it's among countries in the same region in North America, right? But as I've said, South Korea can have a free trade agreement with Russia. Say they are in different places, right? Or South Korea could have a free trade agreement with Germany, okay? Different continents. Or South Korea could have a free trade agreement with one country in Africa. So that is, or two countries in Africa it could be. So that is a free trade agreement, okay? Regional trade agreements is based on your region or based on your location, like the Asian, the Latin America, okay, the North America, okay, the South America. So these kinds of agreements, trade agreements, are called regional trade agreements, okay. And the other point is you have to know what World Trade Organization promotes. Okay, World Trade Organization basically promotes free trade, and once a country is member of WTO, then there are some rules and negotiations that are signed by countries which are members of the WTO. Okay, so when not only this, for example, employee safety issues are also included in WTO. Environment issues are also included in WTO. Okay, for example, Korea is member of WTO. So when employees are working for an international organization in Korea, this international organization has to provide all the necessary safety materials and safety issues, for example, insurances to its employees, according to the requirements of WTO. Okay? But for example, if you take Ethiopia is not member of WTO, and if a multinational corporation goes to Ethiopia and opens its company in Ethiopia, it can hire Ethiopian employees, but it might not abide by the rules of WTO of safety of employees, because Ethiopia is not member of WTO. Okay, so that company in Ethiopia is not forced to abide by WTO rules in Ethiopia, because Ethiopia is not member of the WTO. Okay, but two countries which are members of WTO, the employee safety issues, environment issues, and all issues related to trade should be done, or it should be undertaken according to the rules and regulations that are set forward by WTO. Okay, so WTO is not only about making trade free, but they also solve disputes or conflicts between or among nations when they have problems in international trade. Okay, just like, for example, the US and China had this trade war. Okay, so this trade war will be solved or will be negotiated by the WTO, because China and the US are members of the WTO. Okay, and in WTO there are different hierarchies. So one of the groups or the committee in WTO is called a dispute settlement body, and this body consists of finance ministers of different countries. Okay, so mostly members of the WTO, those who go for conferences in WTO, are the finance ministers of different countries which are members of the WTO. Okay, so the finance ministers or the trade ministers are the one that are going for the meeting or conferences in WTO. Okay, so this dispute settlement body consists of this finance ministers or trade ministers of different countries, and this body will handle this dispute between countries in international trade. And they also pass some decisions. Okay, and they also follow up whether these decisions are implemented by the countries which are in disputes. And they also have the power to impose sanctions on a country which is not abiding by the decisions of the dispute settlement body. Okay, so you have to know this, the functions of WTO. And the other thing I want you to know is to understand this hierarchy. Okay, the hierarchy of preferential free trade agreements. So at the bottom of the hierarchy, there is a free trade agreement which abolishes only tariffs. Okay, but when you go one step further, there is a customs union that abolishes tariffs and also establishes this common external tariffs or barriers. Okay, external barriers is from other countries. Okay, and one step up is the common market that abolishes tariffs, common external trade barriers, and factor movements. Factor movements, in a sense, movement of people, movement of other factors of production. Okay, and when you go one step further, then it grows into economic union. So this free trade agreement can grow to economic union, where you abolish tariffs, you settle common external tariffs, you allow free movement of factors of production, and also have economic and political harmony, okay? And maybe at the last stage have a common or one government, okay? So the free trade agreement might grow to that hierarchy, okay? So I want you to understand this. And the other thing is, as we are global business department students, so you have to know this different free trade agreements in different continents, right? And one important thing is I want you to know the certificates of originality, okay? As we have said, countries sign free trade agreement. For example, US, Canada, and Mexico have a free trade agreement, right? But the free trade agreement is for products produced within these countries, okay? This is to prevent products from imported from other country, imported or exported to other countries duty free, okay? As you've said, if Mexico signed an agreement with US and Canada, then the products should have their certificate of originality. And this means an investor in Mexico or an investor in Canada cannot export products that they have bought from or they have imported from other countries, okay? Because that will give advantage to Canada, right? Because these products are not produced in Canada, they buy it, then they can sell it for the free of tariff. So certificate of originality means, so this is a requirement that restricts transshipment of goods from the country with lowest tariff to another country, okay? So this helps to protect. And so I want you to identify this free trade agreements that could be categorized under customs unions, common markets, and economic union, okay? And the other important thing is maybe to know about these different free trade agreements, okay? So the North American Free Trade Agreement, NAFTA, the Central American Integration System, okay? The common, this already, then the one with DR, which is when the Dominican Republic and the United States join this group, and the Andean Community, okay? The Common Market of the South, and the CARICOM. So I want you to, and the Asia Pacific. As you have said, primarily, for example, Korea was not part of the Asia Pacific Free Trade Agreement, okay? But later on, Korea, China, and Japan have joined this ASEAN group, and in addition to these three countries, Australia, New Zealand, and India have joined. So it's now called ASEAN +6, okay? So I want you also to know more about the Asia Pacific Free Trade Agreement, okay? Then European Union, of course. Then in European Union, there are, this is the best example, as you have said, for the economic union, right? So that's all we have for today. Then if you have questions, we can talk about some questions here. I have one question. In FTA, free trade agreement, does the countries within trade almost all products or only the cooperative advantage product only? No. So they might restrict. So as we have said, when they sign this free trade agreement, the specific details of the free trade agreement will be in the free trade agreement document, okay? So they might specifically mention that products like agricultural products or manufacturing products, something like that. But mostly if it is a free trade agreement where it's not specified, then it means that all the products produced within one country can be sold to the other country duty free, right? So unless it is specifically identified, then it means that all the product is produced in one country, for example, in Mexico, could be sold duty free or tariff free to the US and Canada, okay? So if you have any more questions, we can talk. One more question. I can take one more question and we can stop this chapter's discussion. So, and the other thing is, I still have 15 students missing in the discussion group. So I want you to participate in the discussion question that I have posted on the portal. So the deadline is postponed to Friday. So I want you to remind those of you who haven't yet participated in discussion group to answer the questions in discussion group until Friday. Okay. And if you have any questions, then let me know through the portal. Okay. So this is all I have for today. And I'll see you next week. Okay. If you have any questions, then let me know. You can email me or just send me a text. Okay. So see you next week. Thank you for having me. So, okay. Yeah. So, sure. So goodbye for today.